Hi everyone. Today we are going to do a review over activities 8 and 9 in preparation for your quiz. Up here at the very top of your review, this is your little checklist of the objectives that you need to know for your quiz. Remember to read through this. If you know how to do it, then place a check mark over here off to the right. If you're not quite confident in that specific topic yet, go ahead and highlight it so you know you need to go back and review that a little bit more, okay? So make sure you guys go through this list and see what you can do. All right, first we're going to go over complex numbers and roots and operations with the complex numbers, okay? Just a little quick review. Remember the square root of -1 is I, which means that I squared equals -1. And then before we get into simplifying some square roots, what is the square root of 49? That is 7. Okay? Technically, this is plus or minus 7 because we made a little equation. If you're solving for x, you need to put the plus or minus. But for just the simplifying piece, you don't need to have that plus or minus. So just don't, if you don't put the plus or minus down here, that's perfectly okay. All right? So it says simplify. Remember, no need to show your work when dividing complex numbers. Just type it in your calculator. Okay? So square root of 18, factors of 18 are 9 and 2. And the reason why I'm using 9 and 2 is because the square root of 9 is 3. And I cannot take the square root of 2. So that's just 3 square root of 2. All right, number 2. I have the square root of -1 because I have a negative there. And then factors of 32 are 16 and 2. You could have used 8 and 4. It might just take you a little longer to get there, and that's totally fine. The square root of -1 is I. The square root of 16 is 4. And I cannot take the square root of 2, so that stays under the radical. So my answer is 4i square root of 2. Okay? Alrighty. -4i times 5i. You're just multiplying here. -4 times 5 is -20. I times I is I squared. Remember, you guys can just pretend like those are x's there, right? And then we can replace I squared with a -1. So we have -20 times -1, which equals 20. Positive 20. Two negatives make a positive. All right, number 4, we are adding. So we've got, let's see here. So whenever you're adding or subtracting, remember you're just combining like terms, okay? So -8 minus 1 is -9. -11i plus I, remember that's just a 1 out in front, so -11 plus 1 is -10i. All right, over here, again, we're multiplying right here, sorry. So you're just going to distribute. So -2 times -2 is positive 4. -2 times -4i is positive 8i. -4i times -2 is positive 8i again. And -4i times -4i is positive 16i squared. Okay? Let's go ahead and combine our like terms, the two 8i's together. So we have 4 plus 16i plus 16. Instead of I squared, I'm going to replace that with a -1 because remember I squared is -1. Okay? So this makes it 4 plus 16i. This 16 times -1 is actually -16 now. So then now I can combine the 4 minus 16, which gives me -12 plus 16i. You're just combining like terms after you FOIL that out and distribute. Okay? All right, number 6. Remember, you guys are just typing the division into the calculator. Now, some of us had trouble using the alpha y equals fraction key. So if your calculator is not working with that, remember, you guys can just put parentheses 1 plus I to get the I at second and the little dot at the bottom, divided by -2 plus 4i. And remember to put the numerator and denominator both in parentheses, okay? It just helps your calculator read what you're trying to write better, like what you want it to do, okay? Hit enter. Do not give us decimals as your answer. To change that into a fraction, you're going to hit Math, you want Frac, hit Enter twice, and there you go. So that's negative, oh, I'm sorry, that's 1/10, not negative. 1/10 minus 3/10 I. All right. Now I notice up here that we did not give you guys a subtraction problem, but you still could end up with a subtraction problem on your quiz. If this were a minus sign here, remember you distribute the negative first and then combine your like terms like you would when you're adding, okay? So just be aware of that. Now we have the graphing. It says plot 4 plus I in the complex plane. Label the axes. So when I say label the axes, remember since this is a complex plane, you have your real and your imaginary solutions, or your real and your imaginary terms. So remember the x-axis are your real, and the y-axis are the imaginary. Okay, the real is the a term, and the imaginary is the b term. Okay, remember these are in the form a plus bi, or a minus bi, right? So my a value is 4, and my b value here, remember that's just a 1 out in front, is 1. So this coordinate point is 4, 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4 along the real, 1 along the imaginary. Just making sure I did the 4 right. Okay? Alrighty, so that's your review with complex numbers. Let's flip the page. Solving quadratic equations. So I'm asking you, before I can solve a quadratic equation, what should my equation be set equal to? Remember, your equation should always be set equal to 0. Okay? All right, and then it says, what are 2 other vocab words to describe the solutions to a quadratic equation? Remember, a couple other vocab words are zeros or roots. Okay, we also could use x-intercepts as well. All right, so down below I have all the different methods that you guys learned. First, we're going to start with the square root method. So let's go ahead and get after it here. So square root method, we want to get x squared by itself. So I'm going to subtract 81 from both sides first. We get 2x squared equals negative 81. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 2 to get the x squared by itself. Negative 81 over 2, and that does not simplify nicely. Okay? Now, to get x by itself, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I get x equals plus or minus. Another way to write this is the square root of negative 81 over the square root of 2. Okay? You guys remember that from the radical review earlier on? Now, I need to simplify this guy. I'm going to do that up here. So the square root of negative 81 over the square root of 2, well, that numerator just becomes the square root of a negative, you always take out an I. The square root of 81 is 9. And then I have over the square root of 2. Now remember, you cannot leave a square root in your denominator, so I'm going to multiply both the numerator and denominator by that radical, so then it cancels out. So this becomes 9i square root of 2 in the numerator. Square root of 2 times square root of 2 is the square root of 4, which square root of 4 is just 2. So this answer is x equals plus or minus 9i square root of 2 all over 2. Yes, you guys need to simplify it as much as you can. Do not give us decimal answers. Okay? All right, number 9. First, now remember, this is like your x squared term right here. Okay? You cannot distribute this 6 through because of that exponent, all right? Think of PEMDAS. You would do parentheses, then exponents. You do not multiply first in PEMDAS, okay? But we are basically doing PEMDAS backwards here. Remember how I talked about that? So we're going to add that 42 first to both sides. So we end up with that. Oops, sorry. Okay, now I'm going to divide both sides by 6. So you still can't distribute that 6. That's a no-no. So I end up with x minus 2 squared equals 7. Now, remember, this is like just saying like x squared again, okay? So I'm just going to take the square root of both sides to get rid of that square. And I end up with x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 7. Remember, anytime you guys take the square root in an equation, you have plus or minus, okay? And then I cannot simplify the square root of 7. That's a prime number, so all I have left to do is just add that 2 over. And that 2 does not get added to that 7 because they're not radicals. They're not like terms at all, okay? So just leave it by itself. So it's 2 plus or minus the square root of 7. Okay? Alrighty. Completing the square. Let's see here. All right, it says solve and show your work. Now remember, for completing the square, you guys have to get that c term to the other side. All right, so I'm going to write x squared plus 8x blank. To move that negative 3 to the other side, I would add 3. So I'm going to have positive 3 blank. Okay, now we got to fill in those blanks. So remember, you're going to take the b term, divide it by 2, and then square it. Okay, so my b term here is 8, so 8 divided by 2 is 4, squared equals 16. And you can just type that into your calculator if you need to double check it, okay? So that's what I know to add to both sides. And remember, you're always going to be adding, because if this is negative, anytime you square a negative, you get positive. 2 negatives make a positive, right? Okay, now remember we factor this, and this is a perfect square trinomial. You can take the square root of the first term, which is x, square root of the second term, which is 4. This is a plus sign, so plus, and we're squaring that. And if you guys were to write that out as x plus 4 times x plus 4, I promise you when you FOIL it, you'll get that middle term of the 8x. Equals 3 plus 16 is 19. All right, and then now it looks just like a square root problem, square root problem. So we're going to take the square root of both sides, and I get x plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 19. I cannot take the square root of 19. That's a prime number, so all I have to do now is subtract 4 to both sides. So I get x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 19. Okay? All right. Number 11. Remember, to complete the square, you have to have the a value has to be equal to 1. Notice that this a value is not equal to 1. And also notice that we can divide all of these numbers by 2. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So divide by 2 to everything, right? So we get x squared plus 2x plus 10 equals 0. And we're going to do the same thing. Move this c term over to the other side. So I get x squared plus 2x blank equals, when I move this 10 to the other side, that becomes negative 10 and another blank. Okay? Now my new b value here is 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. And when I square 1, I get 1, right? So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Whatever you do to one side, always got to do to the other. Square root of x is x. Square root of 1 is 1. This is a plus sign, so this is a plus sign. If that was minus, then you'd put a minus sign here. Square it. Again, x plus 1 times x plus 1, I promise you equals that. Negative 10 plus 1 is negative 9. Now, again, this is just a square root problem, so let's take the square root of both sides. So get x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 9. Now, the square root of negative 9, we know that the square root of 9 is a perfect square. That negative, let's talk about that. Let's just do this off to the side. This just means the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 9, right? The square root of negative 1 is I, and the square root of 9 is 3. So this is really just 3i. So this is x plus 1 equals plus or minus 3i. I'm just replacing it. And now I'm just going to subtract 1 from both sides. Now, when I subtract 1 from both sides, notice I'm not going to do 3 minus 1 because they're not like terms. That 1 does not have an I on it, okay? So it's just negative 1 plus or minus 3i. Do not combine those together and say 2. Okay, that's a no-no. Alrighty, keep it going, guys. Alright, the quadratic formula. What is the quadratic formula? If you can't memorize it, watch the Pop Goes the Weasel quadratic formula song, alright? So remember, I might sing it as I write it out, okay? So it goes, the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I really apologize for my singing, but hopefully you'll remember it now. Okay, so solve using the quadratic formula and show your work. Write out A, B, and C, or write out what A, B, and C equal for each part of the problem. So before we can even start, remember, to solve a quadratic function, we have to make sure our equation set equal to 0, and it is, so we're good. So my A value here is 3. That's the first term. B is 4. And C is 3. That's the C term. Okay? So now I'm just going to plug these in. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b, which is 4, b squared minus 4, a is 3, and c is 3. All over 2, a is 3. I sing the quadratic formula a lot to myself whenever I do it. All right, so from here I have negative 4 plus or minus the square root. Now remember, in the last video when you guys were learning this, you guys can just type this all into your calculator right here. So I have 4 squared minus 4 times 3 times, whoops, I gotta type in 3 times 3. Now again, make sure you guys are using your parentheses in case you have like a negative or something so you don't forget anything funky. So negative 20 all over 2 times 3 is 6. All right, now we need to simplify the square root of negative 20 before we start simplifying anything else, okay? So let's just do that off to the side over here. Square root of negative 20 is the same thing as square root of negative 1 times square root of 4 times square root of 5. Square root of negative 1 is I, square root of 4 is 2. I cannot take the square root of 5. So this is just 2i square root of 5. Okay? So I'm going to replace that right here for this term. So I have negative 4 plus or minus 2i square root of 5, because that's what the square root of negative 20 is, all divided by 6. Now notice I can simplify 4, 2, and 6, those coefficients, all by 2. So this is really negative 2 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that's just I square root of 5. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay? Not too bad. Alrighty, number 13. Notice this equation is not set equal to 0. Oh no, we need to fix that. So this is really 4x squared minus 5x minus 6 equals 0 because I need to subtract 6 to both sides. So my A term is 4, B is negative 5, and C is negative 6. Okay? Notice if you guys tried to write out A, B, and C, you probably would have been like, wait a second, what's my C term? It's not 6, it's negative 6 because you have to move it over to the other side, okay? And that negative can change your answer, so be careful. So x equals negative b, which is negative 5. That's why I like to use my parentheses, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Alrighty, I think I got that set up right. Let me just double check. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so this equals, let's see, 2 negatives make a positive, so positive 5 plus or minus. Let's type that little guy in that's under the radical. So negative 5 squared, make sure you put that in parentheses because your calculator will tell you wrong. You're smarter than your calculator. Okay, I think I got that all in there. Yep. 121 all over 8. Okay, now if you're not sure if this is a perfect square, always double check it, okay? Because look there, you get 11. So the square root of 121 is 11, so we get 5 plus or minus 11 all over 8. Now remember, I don't want you to leave your answer like that. When we have nice whole pretty numbers like that, we're going to go ahead and solve both of these. So we're going to solve 5 plus 11 divided by 8, and we want to solve 5 minus 11 divided by 8. Tell me what those both equal, okay? So 5 plus 11 is 16 divided by, 8 is 2. So we get 2. And we get 5 minus 11 divided by 8. No decimals. Math, frac. Negative 3/4. Okay? So if you can, simplify it all the way. If you can't, if you have a radical, just leave it in radical form. Alrighty. The discriminant. What is the formula to solve the discriminant? Go back in your notes and see if you can find that. This is a good study habit to like ask yourself these questions when studying for a math test, okay? So hopefully you found it. But the discriminant, remember, is just the part that's under the radical in the quadratic formula. So it's just b squared minus 4ac. Okay? So remember, if that discriminant, when you solve it, is greater than 0, that means that you have two real rational solutions. Okay? If it's greater than 0, but it's not a perfect square, then you're going to have two real irrational solutions. Because they're not a perfect square. If they're a perfect square, they're rational. Okay? We have b squared minus 4ac equals 0. So that means you're only going to have one real rational solution. And then if it's less than 0, that means that it's negative, like you get a negative under the radical. Anytime we get a negative under the radical, guys, remember we get an imaginary number. The square root of -1 is I. It's imaginary. So this means that we get two imaginary solutions. Okay, just real quick, let's just look back at these formulas. So up here in number 12, our discriminant was -20. And if our discriminant is negative, if it's less than 0, that means we have two imaginary solutions. Hey, look at our final answer. We have two imaginary solutions, okay? And on number 13, under here, we have it's greater than 0, the discriminant's greater than 0, and it's a perfect square. So we have to see if we have two real rational solutions. And yes, our solutions are both real and they're rational. They're perfect. You can take the perfect square of 121, okay? So that's kind of how that relates back, okay? Now, number 14 just says, hey, evaluate the discriminant and determine the nature of the solutions. So first, remember, this has got to be set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. So x squared plus 2x minus 7 equals 0. Okay? Now, I got to find my a, b, and c term. A is 1 out in front of that x squared. B is 2. And c is -7, not +7, because we've got to move it over. So here we go. B squared minus 4ac. So b squared minus 4ac. B squared 4ac. All right, equals, let's type that guy in. -2, oh, whoa, sorry. 2 squared minus 4ac, which is 32. That is greater than 0. Now I have to determine if it's a perfect square or not. Can I take the square root of 32? No, you can't. So that means I'm going to have two real irrational solutions. Meaning like they're going to stay in radical form, okay? It's not going to come out to be a nice whole pretty number like it did in number 13. All right? Let's flip the page. All right, graphing. What buttons do you press to solve a quadratic equation on a graphing calculator? Now, a couple different ways to do this. I know I showed my class, you can find it using the zeros, but the video that you guys watched, it says that you want to hit the second trace and you're going to use the intersect feature, which is number 5. Okay, I'll show you how to get there. So you hit second trace and you're going to use that intersect button, okay? Alrighty, so again, that's just a quick little review. So it says solve the equation using your graphing calculator, write out 2 equations you entered, and draw a rough sketch on your calculator screen as part of your work. Okay, so remember the y1 is the left side of the equation, so x squared plus 2x plus 5, and then y2 is 0. That's the right side of the equation. Okay, so let's go to the y equals screen and type those in. Ooh, that looks blurry. All right, x squared plus 2x plus 5 and 0. Let's go ahead and graph that. Ooh. Okay, so my sketch is going to look something like this. All right, notice that these do not touch. All right, so if they don't touch, I don't have any real solutions, so I would get 2 imaginary solutions, okay? So we can just say no real solutions here, okay? If you write no solutions, I'll accept that as well. All right, number 16. So, oh, I forgot to mention on number 15, we can't find where the graphs intersect because the graph doesn't intersect, okay? All right, number 16. y1 would be negative 7x squared plus 9, and y2 would be negative 2x. So, let's clear this out. Whoopsies. So, negative 7x squared plus 9 and negative 2x. Let's graph it. Ooh. Interesting. These do intersect. Okay, so let me sketch this. It looks like it goes like this. Then it looks like it goes like this. All right, so I have an intersection here and here. Alrighty, so let's find those. So second, trace, intersect. Now I'm going to have to go through this process 2 times because I have 2 different intersections. So this says first curve, which is on this blue curve. So get as close as you can to the intersection as possible. Second curve, that's on the red curve. I think the intersection's here. And then guess, you have to hit enter again on where you think the intersection is. And it looks like it's at negative 1, 2. So this is at negative 1, 2. So that means x equals negative 1 because you're solving for x, right? Okay, so we got to do that again for this guy over here. So second trace, intersect, or you could just hit 5. First curve, I think it goes, ooh, that's too far. About right there, hit enter. Second curve, I think it's right on there, so hit enter. Guess, I think my cursor is where the intersection is, so I'm going to hit enter. Intersection at 1.28. So, and at 1.2, let's round that up to 9, because I have a 5 after that. Okay, so that coordinate point here was 1.29, negative 2.57. And I just need the x values because we just want to solve for x there. Okay. Alrighty. Let's keep it going. So that's graphing. All right. Last thing we got here is just choosing the best method, okay? So it says choose the best method, or choose the method that best fits the following situation. So, looking at this here, it says if the equation is in the form x squared plus c equals 0, or a times x minus h squared equals c, we are going to want to solve by using square roots. Again, just like this is just to get some like critical thinking here. Like, hey, what would be the quickest and easiest way to solve some of these quadratic equations? Now, this method is the fastest and the easiest. This would be the factoring method. These methods always work. That would be completing the square, and the quadratic formula. Use one of these methods if the quadratic formula is not factorable. Or I'm sorry, if the quadratic equation is not factorable. So if you can't factor the quadratic equation, you will have to use completing the square or the quadratic formula. So this would be both of these as well. Okay, and then this method does not give imaginary solutions. That would be graphing, okay? We'll never find an imaginary number on a graph. We won't be able to physically find what I is on our calculator like that. So that would be graphing, okay? Alrighty, so down below it says solve using any method, show your work, and state the method you've chosen and your reason. Now, I'm going to go ahead and solve these, and what I do might not be what you would choose to do, and that's okay, all right? On your quiz, I'm going to give you just one of these questions. You get to pick the method, and you get to, but you have to explain why, and obviously you have to solve it, okay? So looking at this, to me, I personally am going to want to try to factor this. I know that there's factors of 6 that add or subtract to get 5 here. So I'm going to see what I can do. X times x is x squared. Factors of 6 that add or subtract to get 5. Okay, this one's a tricky one. You could use 6 and 1 or 3 and 2, right? I'm going to try 6 and 1 though first. So I get 6x and 1x. If I do positive 6 minus 1, that does give me positive 5, right? So that means the 6 is positive and the 1 is negative. Is positive 6 times negative 1 negative 6? Yes, it is. So yay, I did it. All right, so now that I factored it, I'm going to set both factors equal to 0. Hey, this was on your last quiz. And solve for x. So over here, I'm going to subtract 6. So x equals negative 6. And over here, I'm going to add 1. So x equals positive 1. All right, so I've solved it. The method I chose was factoring. And my reason behind that is just like it looked the quickest and the easiest. So I'm just going to say it was the fastest method / the easiest method, kind of like what it states up there up top. Okay? All right, number 18. Okay. All right, this one's, I don't know if that's going to be factorable or not. That looks a little harder to factor. It's not in the form for the square roots, so I don't want to do that either. So graphing, I might be able to solve it by graphing, but I don't know if I'm going to get imaginary solutions or not. So I always know that completing the square and the quadratic formula work. So I'm going to choose the quadratic formula. Mainly because this a value is not 1 and I cannot divide these all by 5. So I chose the quadratic formula because it always works. And because the a value does not equal 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that quadratic formula. This is set equal to 0, so I'm good. So a is 5, b is negative 4, and c is 2. 5, negative 4, and 2. Good. All right, so x equals negative b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 ac all over 2a. All right, negative b squared minus 4ac. Good. All right, over 2a. Good. I like to check to make sure all my numbers are right before I solve it because that would not be good. All right, 2 negatives make a positive. Plus or minus. Let me type this guy in. Let's see here. Negative 4 squared minus 4 times 5 times 2. Alrighty, so this is the square root of negative 24 all over 10. 2 times 5 is 10. Alrighty. Oh, guys, look, I have a negative under the square root. That means I'm going to get an imaginary answer. So good thing I chose the quadratic formula because I would not be able to find the imaginary using completing square probably. No, I would be able to, but it would just be harder. So let's simplify the square root of negative 24 because we know we have to simplify all the way. So I have negative 1 times, let's see, factors of 24 that I can take the square root of. let's do 4 and 6. Oops, square root of 4, square root of 6. All right, square root of -1 is I. Square root of 4 is 2. We cannot take the square root of 6. So this is just 2i square root of 6. So I have 4 plus or minus. I'm going to replace that 2i square root of 6 for the square root of -24 all over 10. And notice 4, 2, and 10 are all divisible by 2. You're only doing the coefficients. Don't worry. Whatever under the radical, you can't touch it anymore, right? So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so this is just I squared root of 6. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Sorry, got ahead of myself. Ta-da! All right. Let me know if you guys have any other questions. Feel free to reach out. I know this video is a little longer, but hopefully this review helps you guys out. Do not forget to go through your checklist. Whatever that you did not understand in this packet, highlight it and either rewatch the old videos or reach out to your teacher with any questions you guys have, okay? Have a great rest of your day.